Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Before we start, we were just having a chat. We've come together from all over the world for this panel, and we were thinking, how would we normally run a 30-minute meeting at about this time on a Thursday morning? And granted, this is slightly bigger than most Thursday morning meetings that I have, but we thought we'd actually share and start that meeting. There was quite a lot we had in common. So Lisa from Lego is going to talk us through how we would normally start that meeting. Lisa.
Thank you so much, Jim. So I'll just invite you to check out your positions right now. And a lot of legs are crossed, so you can put your feet on the ground, please. And just find a nice, comfortable position. If you're standing, just put your feet a bit wide apart, so you're standing in a well-grounded position. And then I just invite you to relax your neck, your shoulders, your arms. And if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If not, you can keep them slightly open. If you're standing, just keep them slightly open. And then just take a moment to notice what it feels being in your body right now. How does it feel like? Maybe it's the first time you're actually checking in with yourself today. You can notice your feet on the ground. Notice your bum in the seat. Notice your hands in your lap. Just take a moment to be here right now. And then tune into your breath. And without trying to control it, just notice, what does it feel breathing in your body right now? Just notice the air flowing in through your nose. And notice it again as it flows out. Do it again just a couple of times at your own pace without trying to do anything in particular with your breath other than breathing. So breathe in, notice how it feels, and breathe out. And wriggle your toes a bit, wriggle your fingers a bit, open your eyes again, and thank you for becoming present with us here today.
Thank you, Lisa. Round of applause for that. The best bit of advice I've had a kind of coach that I've worked with in terms of presenting, and the best bit of advice they ever gave me about breathing was, when you breathe out, give yourself a 1-pack, which is the one thing I find really easy. What we're going to start doing today is that the object of our session is to tell the story of leadership challenges that are going on in our organizations. So we're going to take each of the panelists in turn, Lego, Andela, NASA, and get an insight as to, in real terms, where does the rubber hit the road? And then the kind of things we want to explore, what's working, what have we learnt, and how do we measure it? So hopefully that fits with a good session for you guys. So Lisa, at Lego.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was reflecting on, so what does leadership look like today in the Lego group? And I had a meeting last week. I was facilitating a dialogue around workload and motivation for a group of people at different levels, different functions. And as we started to share perspective, one of my colleagues, a junior colleague, raised his hand and he said, "Lisa, I'm going to be brave. I actually don't think you're really listening to what we're trying to tell you." So one of our leadership behaviors is about being brave. So I felt quite embarrassed in the moment, of course, not having made him feel seen and heard, but also super excited because actually this is leadership coming alive for us, and leadership is for everyone. So that also allowed me to get curious in the rest of the session, which is another leadership behavior that I could then practice in order to get back on track. But it hasn't always been like that. So if we look 5 years back, in the Lego group, we had more than a decade of continuous growth, but sales was stagnating. We had just laid off 8% of our workforce. We had a new CEO and a new chief people officer. And one of the first meetings we had in the global leadership team for our people operations and development function, the CPO, Lawrence Schuster, said something really needs to change. We want to empower our people to get back to growth. We want to have a much more agile company focused on the customers' and consumers' needs. And we realized by saying we want to empower the colleagues we have around us, we also needed to take a very different approach to leadership. So we pulled together a group of people, not HR, not senior leaders, as we would normally do to define leadership, but people from across the organization, different functions, different levels, individual contributors, leaders, different locations, balanced gender, in order to make sure that we would actually get that reflection of what does leadership mean on a much wider scale. And it was sponsored by our CEO and our CPO. And they actually came up with a totally new model for us. So leadership was now defined, and that's how we define it today, as an act, not as a position. It's about energizing everybody every day. And really, it's through a couple of different behaviors that we see in a playground, which of course is very close to heart for us at the LEGO Group, which are about being focused, brave, and curious. So being in that meeting, actually seeing it come alive, and I see it every day, makes me feel that we're actually getting there now. And I can speak a lot to the implementation, but I think it would be interesting to hear from the rest.
We'll come back. I'd love to get the playbook on how you put that
Absolutely.
into practice. We'll come back to that. I'm going to hop across to Leah at NASA, an iconic organization that we've all heard of, but they've been through a lot of change as well. So, Leah, your story, please.
Quite a lot of mission change at NASA over the years since I've been there. So when I started with the agency about 18 years ago, we had incredible leadership development programs. They were known throughout the federal government for exemplary training, exemplary experiential learning, you name it. We had residential programs, we had on-site shorter programs, and so on. And we had our own competency model that we had developed internally with our leadership behaviors that were addressed, of course, in all of our programming. We had come to a time, fast forward about 10 years-ish, and the programming had become stale. The competencies were no longer relevant, and we had embarked upon a journey to refresh the programming, take a fresh eyes look at the competencies, see what we wanted to really focus on. What do we really want our future leaders to look like? What do we want our junior leaders to look like, as well as our middle level management? And had embarked upon that journey. We also had to rethink how and when, where, and what we wanted to deliver in terms of programming. The residential programming, while tremendous, was not actually attractive to all of our employees. You know, think of parents. It's hard to leave your child, your children, doesn't matter if you're a male or female, for 2 weeks solid and leave your partner in the lurch. So we had to really take that pause, and we're in the process of doing that, taking a fresh look, and our budget was wiped out, completely gone. And I'll talk about the playbook and what we did in between, but I'm gonna fast forward to what we're doing now. There was an in-between phase, I promise. But we have thankfully been able to bring some programming back online. We took the opportunity of COVID and really dove in, feet first, head first, full body into virtual learning, which greatly expanded our audience and really enabled us to stretch the $3 that we had, which was not far off. So $3, I don't know, was that like $3 euro or, sorry. And do some amazing things. And then when we got some budget back, we've now embarked upon what should we do in person versus still keep in line, and what does that blend look like? So that's where we are today, and I'll talk more about it as we continue the conversation.
Well, I look forward to coming back to kind of, cost of living version of development at NASA in a moment. And Darren, your story.
My story began, let's say, 16 years ago, fresh out of university. I think what's useful to know is, first off, I think everyone has what I'll call an identity stack or a purpose portfolio. I'm a technologist, so I think of tech stack. What's the human version of that? The identity stack. So 16 years ago, my identity stack was, well, first of all, I'm a husband. I was also a communicator. I was also an explorer. And lately, I've added a layer to that. I'm an adoptive dad. And then somewhere down the list, I was an operator for an organization. For most people, I noticed at that time, they would optimize for the question of what do I want to be when I grow up? And then they would allow an HR department to tell them where they're going to uproot their family, move to, and contribute to the organization. Now, this always felt audacious to me, and so I took a different approach. I optimized for what is the life I want to live, what is the community that I want to impact. And then I found organizations that were values aligned and would allow me to come in and build an environment where that was possible, not just for me, but for many others. And in the course of this, I actually earned a Guinness World Record in my profession while traveling to all 50 US states and over 50 countries. And a bit of a light bulb went off.
What was the record?
The record is I'm the world's most prolific professional blogger.
Wow.
So if you Google my name, you'll find reading material for months, if not years. But that journey led me to a company called GitLab. I joined them about 4 years ago, recently left to join Andela. And when I joined GitLab, they were on a mission that was deeply personal for me. In the interview, the CEO said, "We want to become the world's first fully remote company to ever IPO." Now, this had never been done. I've worked in hybrid and remote settings my entire career, and I've heard every excuse in the book, from that's niche, it's small but it can't scale, maybe that works in technology, all of the excuses. And I thought, if we can do this, we will make a line in the sand, a historic marker, that working differently, working across geographies, across cultures, can not only scale to be public market ready, but it can be a better way to build organizations that are suited for that. And we achieved that in October of 21. And in joining Andela, what I'm able to do now is take a lot of the learnings that I had from building an organization that was essentially in the future. I join you from the future. And apply that now. And so I'm happy to dive into what those playbooks are.
Well, we're going to move on to the kind of the playbook. What have we done to implement these plans, these leadership challenges in this great tug of war?
Yeah.
And actually, I got the advantage. I know kind of some of your playbooks. So, Darren, I'm going to come back to you for the kind of the playbook.
Yeah. The playbook that we use to scale remote across the globe really anchored on one mindset shift. Most organizations optimize for the speed of knowledge transfer, which is how fast can person A tap person B on the shoulder and transmit what is in one mind to another. But in the future, optimizing for knowledge retrieval will enable a competitive advantage. This is when person A and person B can independently tap into a trusted system of data, information, words, operations, and pull what they need, regardless of whether or not they're online at the same time, they're in the same country, the same continent, whether one's on vacation or not. This shift in thinking about how will information scale is the playbook. I'll give you a tangible example of how this has worked since the dawn of time. First, a little more modern. Let's start with McDonald's. McDonald's has facilities all over the world. And when they're opening a new facility, there are certain attributes that are uniform from one to the other. And in fact, there are menu items that are uniform across countries, languages, cultures. So I wondered, how do they ensure that a Big Mac is a Big Mac at all of their locations? And what I found was when they open a new location, what they do not do is have 17 Zoom calls with 50 people each across 3 or 4 quarters to align on what a Big Mac should look and taste like. What they do is they rigorously document the recipe, and they scale information by writing it down. And what's wild about this concept is it is literally how civilizations have scaled since the dawn of time. We look back at what was written, what are the written artifacts. And what I believe is the superpower of any great remote and hybrid team, and if I'm honest, Every organization is remote to some degree. Even if you have an office building with 2 floors, the person on the ground floor is remote to the person on the first floor. So sooner or later, you're going to need to get good at this. Writing things down, building a culture of documentation, and optimizing for that speed of knowledge retrieval over transfer enabled us to do what we did and is enabling Andela to scale today.
That's fantastic, Darren. Thank you. Well, Lisa, I'm going to come back to yourself in terms of the playbook for these kind of playground behaviors. And maybe if we can wrap in, how have you measured progress against that as well? And then Leah will come to yourself.
Sure. So I talked about the empowerment we wanted to have behind the leadership for everyone. So it was obvious to us the way of also making it come alive would have to be a way that would engage a lot of people. So we actually did an open source for all employees to sign up to become what we call a leadership playground builder. And today we actually see it really as our cultural carriers. And so people just signed up themselves and said, hey, I'd like to learn more about this. I'd love to take it back to my team. Some were people leaders, some were individual contributors. And we had in the first round 800 people sign up to do this in self-volunteered, saying this is exciting for me. They joined a number of programs, so we wanted to equip them in an experiential way, so they got to really get an embodied sense of what does it mean to be brave, focused, and curious. And then they would bring it back to their teams. And by doing this, we also made sure that this was relevant. It wasn't just a one-size-fits-all, because any leadership playground builder would say, this is exactly what we need. I think we should focus on getting more brave here, challenge each other more to get more innovative, or maybe we need some focus because we're all over the place. We lack prioritization. So in that way, it became much more targeted, and we had the inclusivity of people actually making it their own and making it relevant for them, but still with that shared version of how do we see leadership for all in them. And we see, interestingly, so obviously our growth has come back. We just had our annual results out earlier this week. So actually, ever since we implemented this, it has gone really, really great. But also, if we look at it from a motivation point of view, we are in our engagement surveys looking at how do people, we ask people to say, from our colleagues' point of view, do we see them actually live our leadership playground behaviors? And we see a positive correlation to motivation and satisfaction. So there's a direct connect. We don't know the causality of it, but there seems to be a good connect between actually doing this and the motivation, which also makes us feel we are onto something in terms of how we do this.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example. It follows really fantastically, Darren, from what you were saying in terms of, codify this.
Indeed. Look, I will briefly, I'll say there's power in open sourcing this. Lars Schmidt, one of our opening speakers today, mentioned that power. A lot of playbooks are already out there. It just takes asking around, searching for those. And so if you're in a position where you can open source and ask questions, there is immense power in enabling people to contribute.
Yeah, and we do that. We have a repository, so all the teams we have can upload. So we have a huge place for new playground builders. They don't need to start from scratch. They can go in and see what have others done. What have they learned from it? What didn't work? What worked well in order to do that? So exactly to your point, Darren, how do we make sure that we have much more easy access to actually grab what we need when we need it?
Well,
love that.
You're optimizing for knowledge retrieval as well.
Absolutely.
Kudos.
Great. Leah?
So what we did when we were in our pause is we wanted to look at, what is the best way to encourage employees to develop themselves. So we landed on the 70-20-10 model. And the 70-20-10 model's percentage of time, it is not prescriptive, but generally 70% of your time should be on hands-on experiential learning. And it doesn't have to be your job or forever or 6 months. It can be 10 minutes. It can be lead a team meeting. It runs the gamut. So 70% hands-on learning, you can imagine at NASA is very important because you want an engineer to actually be working on hardware, not staring at a screen full time. 20% is coaching and mentoring and self-development. And then the final 10% is actually the classroom learning piece. So where we realized is our role is actually pretty tiny. in the scheme of the whole model, and that's really where we wanted to focus. And we talked to the leadership of the agency about it, and it was like light bulbs went off. Yes, that's exactly what we want. We actually have a chief knowledge officer in our engineering organization, and they too were like, yes. So everyone was just immediately on board with that. I also had the opportunity to do a whirlwind road trip and visit all of our NASA locations. And we were presenting information, but at the same time, we had focus group meetings. And the most requested thing, and I'll call it a thing, because I don't know what else to call it, was for a talent marketplace. So to hit directly in that 70%, and at the time, we hadn't even landed on the model yet. So it just further reinforced why we needed to implement that approach at NASA. So we came back and we, in-house, as NASA will do, developed our own talent marketplace, and it is with tremendous success. We can post opportunities, again, with COVID, you can do remote assignments, so you can be located in California, but actually do work for our Greenbelt, Maryland office. You can be in a science organization in Greenbelt and then work on a human spaceflight project for the Kennedy Space Flight Center. And it is really transformed how we do that 70%. We still have cultural issues because folks do still like to spend time in classroom learning. We are a very intense organization, as you can imagine, the smartest, brightest minds. Everyone at NASA was the A++ student. So, and they're used to classroom learning. That is what they have grown up with. That is their norm. So we're still trying to counteract that piece of it, but it has gone over very, very well. And we do monitor the statistics and how the experiences have gone, and it's been great.
I love that. I think one of the common things is, you said that 70%, it's applied learning. It's learning in the flow of work. And I think a consistent theme is the world is changing so fast that any of the knowledge, and it's often new knowledge that we're receiving, however we're getting it, the sooner you can start putting into practice, the sooner it becomes embedded new behaviors. And that's different from the way we've learned to date and the way we learned in education. Darren, in terms of measurement, you had a couple of, when we were talking, some really practical things. I don't know if you'd be happy to share those.
Yeah, I would first, I'll follow that up with what you just said, Jim, of how do we put this into practice? How do we make it a part of 70% time? I think a big thing to focus on is what bucket we're actually putting remote and hybrid work in. I think for a lot of people, teams here today, you probably see it as a perk or maybe a policy. But it's not that. It is a product. Remote work is a product. And if you shift your thinking that way, you see yourselves as advocates and collaborators with your operations teams. You have to think about your tool stack. Do our tools still serve us? Your learning and development team. Are we teaching people how to communicate effectively? Now, 3 years ago, you would have said, why? Well, people can write emails well enough, but it's different now. And I think for people operations teams that want to feel more empowered, if you lean into remote work being a product instead of just a policy that you write, you will see a drastic difference. Here's a tangible example of what that could look like from a measurement standpoint. Many of us use Slack or Teams, but are you paying attention to where the communication is going? So at GitLab, we measured the ratio of messages sent in a DM, a direct message, a private message, versus those sent in a public channel. And for many organizations, the vast majority of their comms are happening one-to-one behind closed doors. Meanwhile, people are saying information is siloed, I don't feel like I'm connected, I don't feel a sense of belonging, and I can't collaborate with anyone. I wonder why. Every conversation is happening behind a closed door. Now, in an office, this would be almost impossible because there's so much open space, but you have to design virtual open space and a culture around transparency to break down some of those walls. So measure where your communication is happening. It is a massive indicator of how well connected your teams are, how collaborative they are, and ultimately how productive they are.
That's great. We've got about 90 seconds left between us, so I'm going to do a quick fire, 30 seconds each. What are you working on next in terms of this ongoing leadership challenge? Lisa.
Well, we are having our annual Stick and Twist campaign going on right now, where our leadership playground builders can decide whether they stay on or whether they want to pass it on to someone else. We have an alumni now of 3,000. We have a company size of 27,000 right now, so we have a huge share of our population who's already doing that. And then we, of course, looking into how to nurture it, and that's maybe the key learning, that is that culture is not just something you build and then it's there, it's something that needs constant nurturing. So we're continuously looking at how to fuel it and nurture it and make it come alive and be exciting and interesting for people to continue to join in on.
That's amazing. Leah, immediate thing you're working on? Very quick fire.
We are continuing to evolve our leadership development programs. We have 2 that are getting ready to launch this spring. So that's really where my head is right now, because they're incredibly important for our future leaders, for our agency. We are actually experiencing quite a bit of turnover because we recently launched Artemis 1. So a lot of folks hung on before Artemis 1, and when it launched, then they were like, oh, I can retire now. And so we are trying to really put an incredible focus on who's in our leadership pipeline and what are the developmental opportunities that we need to put in place to shore them up. So that's
fantastic. And just finally, I kind of really wanted, Darren, we had a conversation and you were saying, when we look back, when historians look back in 50 years' time on this moment, it won't be about the future of work. It will be about the future of life. Just to finish, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think a lot of us right now are fixated on this future of work, but as Lars pointed out earlier, this is very much the present of work. And when I look ahead 50 years, I think the story that will be written, there will be 2 main headlines. One is that we have just experienced the greatest transfer of institutional power that any of us have seen in our lifetimes. And you cannot just rip that away from the entire world. It is a permission slip to evolve your ways of working, because people have had a glimpse into what life looks like when they can optimize for something other than a commutable distance to work. Everyone here has had 3 years to fully reevaluate their identity stack, and work is in a different place. And that is a massive opportunity for people teams to enable culture to be built outside of the workplace. The second thing is that they will write about, this is the era where massive societal shifts happened in how people lived. You're seeing it already. You and I are living examples of reprioritizing where we live. This will be people choosing to live near their parents so they can have in-home elder care. This will be people who choose to live within walking distance of a hospital that specifically cares for the ailment that their child has. This will be people choosing to live next door to a national park because they're optimizing for air quality over smog and traffic. And work will be the catalyst that enables these shifts. And so if you're a people leader, this is your opportunity. And I would encourage you to lean into your tools and your people until there's no gap left between connecting brilliance with opportunity.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, thanks for sharing our Thursday morning meeting. Huge round of applause for the great panel.